Welcome to our sixth of the seventh Lenten Speaker Series talks. This series is being offered by the Brandywine 100 Deanery. We hope to have many more joint ventures as this with our 6 parishes over the next 3 years. The Brandywine 100 Deanery is made up of the Church of the Holy Child, Holy Rosary, Immaculate Heart of Mary, St. Helena's, St. Joseph's on the Brandywine, and St. Mary Magdalene parishes. Your deanery leadership team, made up of lay people and led by me, has been working for the past year on the strategic plan for our deanery. More information on this plan will be coming forth after Easter. As you know, each of our speakers in the series has agreed to speak for 40 to 45 minutes, then allow 15 to 20 minutes for questions. All the questions will be held until the end of the meeting. If you have a question, you may send it to brandywinedeanery@gmail.com, and that is on the screen in front of you. And we will ask as many of the questions as possible during our question period. I'm excited to introduce our distinguished speaker this evening, Dr. Morland, who is a professor from Villanova University who will be speaking on finding faith on campus. Dr. Morland is the Quinn Welsh Endowed Chair and Director of the University Honors Program at Villanova University. A full professor in the Department of Humanities, her academic expertise and research include medieval theology, interfaith dialogue, and comparative theology. She's the author of Known by Nature, Thomas Aquinas on Natural Knowledge of God, Muhammad, Reconsidered, a Christian perspective on Islamic prophecy, and Daring to Live, the Guide to a Meaningful Life. She is the current recipient of a Hope and Higher Education Templeton Foundation 3-year grant. We're very grateful for Dr. Morland for speaking to us this evening. As a reminder, if you have any questions during her presentation, please email them to us at brandywinedeanery@gmail.com. Dr. Morland, welcome.
Thank you so much, Father Carrier. I'm delighted to be with you here this evening. Can you hear me? Can everyone hear me? I'm hoping the answer is yes. It's tough to talk into a camera and to these little boxes. But the truth is that that's what enables us to be together this evening. I'm traveling to DC and I am able to be with you. I believe you're all in Delaware. So I'm delighted to be here. And Ellen, thank you for the invitation. Father Carrier, thank you for that kind introduction. I am here to just tell you a little bit about myself. I promise I will finish talking by 7:40. So whatever questions you have or comments you have, I'm delighted to entertain them for the last 20 minutes of our time together this evening. I just want to talk to you a little bit about who I am, the work that I do with college students in particular, and then we can kind of take it from there. So I've been at Villanova University for 17 years. I'm a theologian by training, a Catholic theologian, and my vocation has taken me to unexpected places, and I'll talk about that in a second. The classroom is my primary field of evangelization. That is the work that I do, and I will say that over the course of the last 17 years, I've become more and more emboldened in that work, the fact that really teaching is evangelical work. But I would say that I characterize my work much more as kind of proto-evangelization. So I meet students in the vestibule, let's say, or really even outside the parish walls, and try to meet them where they are. So the theme for this evening is that we evangelize emerging adults as they are, not as we would like them to be. Let me say that again. We evangelize emerging adults as they are, not as we would like them to be. Much the way that God tries to reveal God's self to us as we are and not as God would like us to be, because we fall short so much of the time. So my colleague, who's the dean of the Catholics at the Catholic University of America in Arts and Sciences, Tom Smith and I wrote a book together that's being published in September. It's now, the title actually just changed to The Young Adult Playbook, Living Like It Matters. And this book has come out of decades of listening to emerging adults at Villanova and being growingly concerned about them, being growingly concerned about their ability to cross the threshold into a flourishing adult life. I'll give you a quick story. This was maybe 10 years ago, more than 10 years ago now, I think. Yeah, it must have been more than 10 years ago. Villanova did this. I don't know if you work for these organizations that like have these big ideas and implement them, and sometimes they work and sometimes they don't. Well, Villanova Theology Department decided that anyone who's teaching Introduction to Theology had to, for one session a semester, show up with anyone else in this big room, and they would deal with like some big topic. And the second semester that they did this program, I showed up with my 16 honors undergraduates, mostly first-year students, and the topic was the hookup culture on campus. And Villanova, I love Villanova. I love working there. Have one of my children is a student there, and I'm really grateful to the place. But this was not a win. The only moral vocabulary at work was feminism, and it's not that I'm an anti-feminist or anything, but it just did not. It was too weak. It was embarrassing. I was so distraught at the end of that hour that I said to my students on a whim, would you want to, instead of writing your final paper for the semester, would you consider going on a date and doing this dating assignment that my friend and colleague at Boston College, Carrie Cronin, had been doing for years? And 15 of the 16 students took me up on it. And I sat down and read these reflection papers from these students who, most of whom had never gone on a date before and were going on a date. And it's like the scales fell from my eyes. It's like I was that rabbi, walking on the highway, seeing the half-beaten Samaritan, and just realizing like, wow, the lives of my students are in deep disarray, and we have to do something about it. So out of that, I was part of this curriculum building initiative, and I ended up teaching the last 6 years. I've taught this course called Shaping an Adult Life for mostly seniors in the honors program to help them think about life beyond Villanova, because I've noticed that students arrive totally overprepared in like study skills and ability to write and a lot of kind of organization kid habits, but they're underprepared to ask deep questions about identity, to really brace themselves to live a flourishing adult life. And college campuses across the country largely exacerbate that problem. And so I started teaching this course, and the first time I taught this course 6 years ago, it was like I had put my finger on this raw nerve of my students' lives. The response to that course was almost visceral. They acted like finally somebody gets what we're facing. The course is designed around 3 building blocks of a flourishing adult life. Work, the meaning of work. Leisure, what to do with your leisure time. They don't even know how to spell leisure. And then relationships, and that's where the dating assignment comes in, which I didn't think that I would have to issue to Villanova seniors, but the maybe third time I taught it, I think during one class session I asked, how many of you have said I love you to somebody other than like your mother or your cousins? And I think 3 out of 20 students raised their hands, and I was shocked. I just said, like, what are you doing with your time? And so I gave an emergency dating assignment to seniors. And I started to just pay attention to and listen to them really more and more acutely. And I'm going to make 3 observations about 3 challenges that that young adults face in work, in leisure, and in relationships, and then talk about 3 strategies that have helped my 18 to 22-year-olds a lot. Because these high school shapes these students, and then when they graduate, they're shaped by their habits. Their habits graduate along with them. So really, what I'm really talking about, like, high schoolers through 30-year-olds. And I've talked about the book, and the book is finally going to be published, but I talk about the book manuscript. I've talked about it. I've taught it to high schoolers, to college students, and to people in their 20s. And it's astonishing how acutely those 3 like pretty different age groups relate to it. So the big problem around the meaning of work is what I call choice paralysis. Meg Jay, who's a clinical psychologist at the University of Virginia, uses this great image. She talks about swimmers who have been really trained. I don't know if any of your children did like winter swimming, where they show up every morning at some ungodly hour. They're trained in these technical skills of swimming. So she's talking about a swimmer who's been really well trained, swims out into the middle of the ocean, who's got all the technical skills, and then has to decide where she's going to go. And she doesn't know whether she's going to go to the Bahamas or to Key West. And she's stuck. She's got all the skills, but she doesn't know where she's headed. That choice paralysis is something that our students, our young people, are radically suffering from. This shows up in 2 different ways with the students that I teach. Either some students rush through the decision making and commit too early to jobs and are miserable, and other students delay the decision making process until the very end, until graduation, and then they don't know what on earth they're going to do with their lives. And each of these students are trying to run away from that deep, difficult choice, that question of, what do I want to do with my life? Not what do my parents or my aunts or my counselors want me to do with my life. What do I want to do with my life? The one who rushes through is typically like the business student who decides too early to commit to an internship and then a job. And then the one who postpones the decision making is typically the art student who takes a lot of interesting classes, but is just as stuck at the end of those 4 years. Both of the students survived high school because they thought that high school was this marathon with these, and it was, with these guiding markers. The whole goal of high school is to get into a college. And they know, at least the students at Villanova, they run that race really well. But once they arrive there to college, they think that college is going to be just another race. The problem is that college is much more like Costco than it is like a clear marathon. College is much more like a huge, confusing supermarket in which there are all these different choices. And if you don't know what you're hungry for, if you don't know what you want to make for dinner, you're going to have a really difficult time walking through those Costco aisles. And so a lot of them do is they decide they're just going to run another marathon and try to race through it. And they make decisions that aren't really intentional to who they are and true to who they want to be. So I inculcate them in Ignatian discernment practices. Don't call it Ignatian discernment practices. That's why this is proto-evangelism. But it really does help make a difference. I train them to think about these big decisions in terms of choosing a set of goods on one side and a set of goods on the other side, instead of this pro-con list that they're really trained to think about. But that helps them realize that there's a tragedy of walking away from a set of goods. When you decide decision B instead of decision A, you've got to say no to a set of goods in order to embrace another set of goods. But I try to arm them with the tools to have the courage to make that decision. I also talk about rehabilitating the imagination. Gosh, our young people's imaginations are so radically impoverished. It's not just the phone, but a lot of it has to do with, of course, with social media. I remember when I have 4 children, and I was living in DC, nursing my second child, and my husband and I went to the Folger Shakespeare Library to listen to Marilyn Robinson, one of my favorite fiction writers. And I was like in the fog of early motherhood. But that night I will never forget. I looked up onto that stage. Marilyn Robinson was so articulate. She had such a sense of presence. She was such a faithful Christian. I realized to myself, like, I want to be you. I want to be like you. And so I talked to my undergraduates about real concrete models that they should seek out concrete models in their lives. And if they've got a model that they want to get to know, to reach out. I talk to them about building, strengthening weak ties and reaching out to people that they admire and asking them, how did you get this great job that you wanted to get? And then I talked to them about thinking about not what am I good at? A lot of undergraduates have made their collegiate and then professional decisions based on like a class they were good at when they were 15. But they should instead ask, what do I want to become good at? So much of what looks natural late in the game are really the result of acquired skills and practices, a lot of hard work going into whatever craft, whatever profession these students end up doing. Okay, so those are the strategies that I use to overcome this choice paralysis that a lot of my students face. The second segment has to do with leisure, and it's like mind-blowing to these students. I have my own children, so I know what it's like to try to get our kids off social media and off gaming and all of that. And what I've learned over the years is that instead of trying to that we should focus on the planting versus the pruning. The pruning has to happen, but if you don't have something to plant in place of what you've pruned, the pruning's never going to work. So that my students think of free time as wasted time. It's because they do waste free time because of the scrolling, because it's addictive. I actually had never been on, was a very light Facebook user. I'd never been like bitten by the social media bug until kind of late in the fall. I went on TikTok, and I remember going into my class saying like, wow, I've never experienced anything like this. I get how addictive it is. I just hadn't had it. I feel like I understand my students a lot more. So they think of free time as wasted time. That's the challenge. Technology is a real problem because all of their lives are wrapped around their phone. Even if you want them to do these, and I do have them do these social media fasts, they can't do group work for classes without their phone. I mean, they can't get into the library. The phone is a real problem. So is drinking, of course. Binge drinking I didn't originally want to write on drinking at all, but my students, they read a lot of the manuscript drafts and they convinced me that I had to. And the problem isn't just drinking. It's like showing up to whatever event, drinking like a fish, posting photos with the right people, curating the photos. Sorry, you got to curate the photos first, then you post them apparently. And then you have to like the photos that other people post. And that seems like a part-time job to me. It's just the social lives that they're anchored to, that their lives are kind of circulate around are not fabulous. And part of what I try to do is to get them to realize that there are other alternatives. And so I talk about pruning and planting. They make promises to each other, to themselves, and honestly, for some students, it's life-changing. Part of it is social media, but a lot of grads will contact me and talk to me about practices that they've kept beyond graduation. I talk about Sabbath practices. None of them, honestly, even that my pious students really have a true Sabbath practice on Sunday. I mean, it's just our culture, remember when stores were closed on Sundays, that's utterly foreign to our culture now. And so I instill not just Sabbath practice on Sunday, but little daily Sabbath practices for them, so that they can reclaim their free time in a way that truly frees them. And then finally, the love. The data is really grim out there with respect to romance and relationships, really grim. What I learned over the last several years is that the problem is not the hookup culture at all. I went in thinking the problem was the hookup culture, but the real problem on college campuses, and not just on college campuses, is this epidemic of loneliness. It's severe. I'm really worried about it, and I'm doing everything I can to help my students make time and make space and have the courage to develop real friendships, because that really is the key to not just college, but it's the key to living a happy human life. And as part of that, I do become a dating doctor. It's totally absurd. I did not go to graduate school to train myself to become a dating doctor, but I'll have conversations with students like, Dr. Morland, should I walk from West Campus to the brunch place? Should I get an Uber? How do I handle paying? I mean, like real nuts and bolts. Like they just don't know how to date because the word date is so intimidating to them. It's astonishing that like getting naked with each other with the lights off is not a problem at all. But like asking somebody out for a coffee date makes them break out into hives. It's crazy. But once they've gone on the coffee date and realize how healthy it is, how safe it is, how humane it is, how it really reaches deeper into their human aspirations. For some students, it changes the way they walk through college. And then I get a lot of cute emails about their successes and failures. So the answer to the epidemic of loneliness is really taking the risk to try something different, try something beyond porn on the one side and hooking up on the other. Because porn and hooking up and porn is kind of wrapped up in opting out. Opting out and hooking up are really two sides of the same coin. Everyone's afraid of Eros, and Eros is a risky, difficult thing. I totally grant that. But Eros redirected and Eros fully flourishing, and Eros leading to a lifelong companionship is worth developing and fighting for and cultivating. So I talk a lot about taking risks, because fear of failure is really, really huge. And a lot of young people are walking around with the wounds, not of their own making, wounds. They come from families that are in trouble, have been in trouble. They carry around wounds, the decisions that their own parents have made, siblings, even elite students carry these wounds around with them. So I use an image of a house, talk a lot about moving through intimacy safely, and that they need to start on the porch, not rush up to the bedroom. And rushing up to the bedroom, actually, surprisingly, for young emerging adults, it's not so much disrobing, it's much more like oversharing online in a way that's unsafe. And so you've disrobed mentally online, and then when you get together in person, it's way too awkward. So I talk about these different stages of intimacy: the porch, the living room, the kitchen table. Talk a lot about sitting around the kitchen table and give them kind of concrete ways to do that. And that just helps them because they're really, really at sea. The language around intimacy, the language around dating is intentionally vague. So they're talking, but talking can include having sex, oddly. They're not together, they're hanging out, they're in a situationship. What is a situationship? I mean, it's very intentionally vague. And so I talked to them about defining what it is that they're doing together with each other. So just to summarize, and then I want to say a few more things. In work, their challenge I find is choice paralysis. And so I help them develop Ignatian discernment practices. In leisure, they understand free time is wasted time. And it is actually, but it shouldn't be. And that's not a fully flourishing life if your free time is wasted time. And so I talk to them about pruning and planting, but more importantly, planting. Like a lot of them used to play the guitar or used to play pickup basketball or used to crochet or used to do paint or used to write music. I mean, they're actually really creative, but the US educational system has stamped out all this sort of pushed to the margins, all these creative impulses. And so in the leisure section, a lot of it is about kind of rediscovering these practices that they had when they were young, even just hanging out with friends. I had one student tell me last week that she made her friends leave their phones in their room and then went out and did a bonfire on campus. And it was like this radically new experience. And of course it's a radically new experience because they're not used to being with each other without the intermediary of the phone. And then finally, in love, we talk about overcoming the epidemic of loneliness. One day that the scales really fell from my eyes was some years ago. I did give these dating workshops. Again, I think it's absurd that I give dating workshops, but that's what I do. And I have this cute kind of 5 steps to success PowerPoint. And at the end of it, during the questions and answers, one student raised her hand and said, I can use this to make a friend. And I thought to myself, wow, like that's awful. I didn't realize things were that bad. But things are that bad. Our young people are really lonely. And it's not just COVID. Certainly COVID was a contributing factor. Certainly social media is a contributing factor. Absolutely the educational system that is a total grind is a contributing factor. But if they don't know how to make friends, maintain friends, and cast off friends that are not healthy for them, they're not going to be able to be married and commit to family life, which is like the greatest joy of my life. So I want my students to be introduced to it. Okay, so the most important takeaway, I just realized it's getting dark here and I can't. Anyway, I hope you can see me. The most important takeaway is that we evangelize emerging adults as they are, not as we would like them to be. Okay, here I want to tell you a quick story about giving a lecture to a religious community of Benedictine women who are cloistered and live a contemplative life. This is a community in Connecticut. I'm going there this weekend, actually. It's where I do my yearly retreat. It's the Abbey of Regina Laudis. These women, if you look up holy women in the dictionary, you find these women. They pray 7 times a day and they chant Gregorian chant. They have a charism of hospitality. They live on 300 acres and farm the land. They're really heroic. And I was given the privilege of going behind the grill and giving them a presentation about emerging adults and the field of evangelism and how to meet emerging adults as they arrive to the Abbey. And I painted the grimmest picture I could possibly have painted. Like, imagine what I'm saying tonight, but more grim. You know, the porn addictions, alcohol addictions, everything. And at the end of this presentation, Mother Abbess, Mother Lucia, raised her hand. She was the first one to speak. And she said, you know what, Anna, everything that you said this afternoon about emerging adults, all of it we suffer from here at the Abbey. Technology addictions, alcohol addictions, epidemic of loneliness, you name it, we suffer from it. So we've got to look within first, and look within and realize that we carry these same blindnesses and sins and weaknesses, so that it's not about, it is about evangelizing outward, but that evangelism begins within. And I thought that was so wise. I was really stunned by that, and I'll never forget it. I'll definitely never forget it. Second takeaway is something that Father Michael Himes said to me years ago. I was his teaching assistant, oh my gosh, 30 years ago in graduate school. And I remember during a homily, he was talking about the decline of the priesthood. And he said, you know, the face of the Holy Spirit is totally unexpected and astonishing. And it's our job to be on the lookout for the face of the Holy Spirit today in all sorts of unexpected ways that happened in the first century Palestine, right? I mean, nobody expected that the descendant of King David would be the son of a carpenter from this hick town. Nobody expected that Jesus of Nazareth would be walking along the streets of Galilee and actually be the Son of God. And so we have to be really open to the unexpected faces of the Holy Spirit, and realize that while, you know, my own children's religious practice doesn't look like what I thought it would look like, and my own students, and we have to love them, and we have to embrace them, and we have to greet the Holy Spirit within them, because the Holy Spirit is still all around us. We just have to have the eyes, I think, the openness to encounter the unexpected faces of the Holy Spirit. Let's see. I think that's it. Where am I? Oh, good. I finished a little bit early, which is great because it's so hard to just speak to black boxes. But hold on, let me just see if I can turn on a light, because I bet you can't see me. Hold on. Hold on.
While Dr. Moreland is looking for the light, if you have any questions, you certainly are welcome to send them to brandywinedeanery@gmail.com, and we'll pose as many of them as possible.
Okay. Okay, can you see me better?
I can see you.
Okay, good. Sorry about that. I didn't realize the sun would go down. I'm traveling and hadn't thought that through, but anyway, I finished a little early, and I'm happy to entertain any comments or questions.
We're waiting for any questions. If anyone has any, we ask you to send them in to us.
I'm going to ask the question because instead of sending it to you, Father, because everybody's waiting for so long. Could you describe Ignatian discernment? It was something that you mentioned that you help the kids to, or emerging adults, I like that, with this when it comes to career and vocation.
Sure.
What parts of that process, well, describe the process, and what parts of that are you asking them to do.
Sure. So I talk about defining moments. I actually draw from a book by a business school faculty member at Harvard who wrote this book called Defining Moments for Middle Managers. So I baptized Badaracco, though, that's the author of this book, and draw from Ignatius. And I talk about they face moments in which they have to make a decision that's going to define them, that's going to define who they are. That could be where to go to college, it could be what internship, it could be a decision between A and B that are real possibilities and that will make a difference in their lives. And I talk about how we often think that we make decisions with our brains, but that the role of the imagination is really, really crucial in decision-making processes. And Ignatius of Loyola was really good on this. And so he trains us to imagine that we have made decision A and imagine that a couple of times, sit with it, wake up the next morning, pretending that you've made decision A, and pay attention to how you feel. Pay attention to whether you feel consolation or desolation. But you've got to do this over some days or weeks, because sometimes you'll initially feel consoled in a decision that you make, but that initial feeling of consolation is distracting. So you've got to think about whether that consolation stays. The initial consolations, the surface consolations, can be fleeting. So, for example, a student who is deciding between a very lucrative job in Manhattan in banking, say, and another job in her hometown in Pittsburgh. There's an initial draw to that banking job, the prestige, the power, the financial remuneration that is initially consoling. But the lasting feelings of consolation that have to do with going back to your people and your place and being around your family and taking a job that perhaps has more responsibility. Say, I'm totally making this up, this sort of particular scenario, but it's actually not, it's not an unusual scenario for my students. They're able to realize that their imagination is informing their bodies and their brains about what they're really drawn to, but they have to pay attention, and sometimes they'll have to practice an indifference toward an initially attractive possibility. So they might have to practice Ignatian indifference toward a financially lucrative possibility. I do a lot of Aristotle, in which I teach them the difference between an internal good and an external good, and money is an external good. And then I talk to them about finding spiritual companions, people that they trust, who can help guide them to sort of quiet down the voices that are not helpful. The comparison cage voices are radically unhelpful, but to listen to people that they admire, to seek out people that they admire, to help them make these decisions. And then I talk a lot about weighing goods, about they have to write down what are the goods that attract them to option A, and what are the goods that attract them to option B, and to not think in terms of negatives, but if something is a negative, they've got to like turn it into a good, and to realize, and this is an Augustinian insight, that life is about weighing limited goods, and that they've got to make a decision that draws them to a deeper good.
Mary McCrossan, can you unmute and ask your question? This is Dr. Mary McCrossan. She has her hand raised. Okay. Well, we have another question here. Wow, a lot of questions all of a sudden. Are your students trained in their Catholic faith and its tenets when they arrive at Villanova?
Of course not. A few are, but I think we know the state of catechesis for the last 50 to 70 years in the US. We all know that, right, whether they went to Catholic schools or not. So the answer is, with rare exception, no. That's why I'm doing proto-evangelism. But I will say, so let me just add this one thing. Students who come with solid background, both with respect to faith practice and theological knowledge, what I've talked about this evening really does speak to them as well. So they, even if I'm talking in proto-evangelical terms, they find sustenance in it. And yeah, that's all I'll say.
Dr. McCrossan's question was, do any groups of students seem, somebody's calling, I'm sorry. Do any groups of students seem more prepared for adult life? Homeschooled students, kids from bigger families? Thank you, great talk.
Oh my gosh, I love that question because I was so obsessed with that question when I first arrived at Villanova. Because we have 4 kids and we were all we were trying to make these educational decisions. And I thought, like, if I could only, unlock, like, find out what is going to safeguard my own children. And so I would ask my students, the ones that I admired, where they went to high school. And the truth is, it was such a mixed bag, crazy mixed bag. I remember one year I thought, like, we had to move to Chicago and send our kids to St. Ignatius of Chicago because I had one student who was fabulous from there. I mean, that's just absurd. Some homeschool students, some students who came from public school and were unchurched, but had just were intellectually alive and then therefore alive to religious questions. Like, Simone Weil says, if you seek the truth, you will not long, it won't be long until you fall into the arms of God. That's a total paraphrase, by the way. I butchered it, but just intellectual seekers as well. Gosh, I wish I had an answer to that question. It would have made parenting a lot easier. I don't know. I'm not sure if this is right. I do think family makes a big difference. That's not necessarily comforting, but I'm just gonna say it. I think family makes a big difference. Okay.
Actually, there's a question related to that. Has the breakup of the family contributed to the students' social problems?
100%. 100%. I can't tell you how many students have just broken up in tears. I do this one thing where I read The Jeweler Shop aloud. The students read John Paul II's play, The Jeweler Shop. And without exception, every time I've done that in Act 3, I don't know if you're familiar with that play, but in Act 3, the theme is the daughter who's been affected by the estranged marriage of one of the relationships, and students just break down in tears in the middle of reading it. It's heartbreaking. A lot of students tell me a lot of things, and it's a challenge. It's definitely a challenge, but then there are these, like, unusual at the micro level. Like, I think at the macro level, we could all get depressed forever. But if you experience enough success at the micro level, you have a lot of reason to not, at least I have a lot of reason to not despair. So students who come from difficult family situations, you still see the attraction, the hope, the desire for truth, beauty, and goodness, and the desire for real relationship. Like, it's 100% there, I think.
Good. Okay. Have you taught theology of the body to your students to prepare them for marriage?
I have not. I've made my own children go to theology of the body conferences. So I do, as a parent, really believe in theology of the body. So I've definitely exposed my own children as a parent. But in my role at Villanova, well, I mean, I teach the jeweler shop, I teach John Paul II. I have not explicitly taught theology of the body.
Do you, you have gotten more questions than any other speaker, I have to say, by a long shot.
Quickly.
What supportive ways can we advise, if asked, emerging adults to accept that there are many falls on a career path and that failure, not necessarily the best word, is healthy and inevitable?
I cannot tell you how important that question is. It's so hard. Their fear of failure is so crazy, but it comes from their parents, right? I mean, they're a generation who weren't allowed to like fall in the playground. So I just try to bring in models into the classroom of alumni who have gone through 3 or 4 different careers and now are successful in the career that they found that they actually love. For me, it's actually, I think the fear of failure leads them to really unhappy professional lives, which then leads to the failure, the actual failure in the life, right? So if I feel like if I can course correct right at the beginning of their flight, you know, if they're leaving, this is another Meg J image, if they're leaving DC and they're on a plane, if you course correct a little bit early on, they're going to end up in Seattle and not San Francisco. And so if early on, I can actually get them to think like, wait, do you really want to be an engineer? Is that really, or were you just good at math in the 10th grade? If I can help them downshift during college and ask those difficult identity questions, I feel like I can help them then take the risk needed. Not that they're not going to fail, but there are all these myths about there's this one career. I have to find that one career. I don't know if it's cinematic. I'm not sure what it comes from, but it's deeply destructive.
Okay, well, I always say that I'm every mother's of a college student's best consolation because I graduated with a 2.14 from the University of Delaware, and I did okay. Do you find that current college-age students think about the traditional 4 last thoughts of death, judgment, heaven, and hell?
Absolutely not. They think they're invincible. I mean, they do stupid stuff all the time because they think that they're totally invincible. So it's just not age appropriate for an 18-year-old to think that death is anywhere near them. And not to mention, like, we're not in the 13th century. We don't smell death. Death is hidden from us as a culture. We hide it away. They're around only other people their age. So we've done a lot as a culture to keep those 4 thoughts, those 4 serious thoughts from their cultural imagination.
Okay. I had a general question. The reason we're doing this series is that we're trying to teach everybody how to evangelize their friends and family, everyone in our deanery. How do you talk to these kids specifically about your faith?
Yes. I'll give you a quick story. I remember years ago, I was teaching the Gospel of Mark, and a student asked me, Dr. Moreland, do you believe in this gospel? Do you believe this is true? And I started with this like academic dance. I can't remember what I said at first. And then the student said, no, Dr. Moreland, I want to know whether you believe this gospel is true. And I looked at the student and I said, yes, yes, I do. And I have taught differently since that moment because I realized, you know, students deserve the truth from me and they deserve to know that I'm a believing Catholic. And they deserve to know it in the way that I teach without it being alienating. Like that's the trick. That's really the tricky thing. And that's the way that it takes years to really get it right. But to do it in a way that doesn't alienate anyone is really important to me. And yeah, that's what I hope I'm doing.
Father, that's the end of my questions. I'll let you take over.
Dr. Morland, thank you for your fascinating talk. I'd like to remind everyone that our next speaker next week will be our final speaker. Will be Wednesday, March 27th. And it is Austin Rouse, who is the president of CFAM. His topic is No Finer Time to Be a Faithful Catholic. This promises to be an especially fine talk on the eve of the beginning of the Triduum. Austin is the president of Center for Family and Human Rights, a New York and Washington, D.C. based research institute, and special consultative status with the UN Economic and Social Council. CFAM has played a central role in blocking the global right to abortion through UN documents. Austin is a longtime columnist with Crisis Magazine and the author of 4 books. We invite you to share this last speaker of our series with your friends and your family. Tell them about it, and hopefully that they will join us next week along with you. Before we conclude this evening, I just remind you that next Monday, March 25th, from 3 o'clock in the afternoon until 8 p.m. in the evening, all of our churches throughout the diocese will be open for Reconciliation Monday, an opportunity for you to celebrate confession, the sacrament of reconciliation, and to experience God's grace and God's mercy as we bring our Lenten season to a close in preparation for Easter. Again, that's next Monday from 3 to 8 p.m. All of our churches throughout the diocese will be open for confessions. So if you're not near your local parish church, you can stop into another church. Sometimes people don't like to go to their own parish church for confession because they don't want Father to know what their sins are. So you can go to the neighboring church or one down the street, or if you're coming home from work, one that may be near your work. Again, that's next Monday from 3 to 8 p.m., Reconciliation Monday, available in all of our churches in the diocese. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you for participating with us this evening and to thank all who have helped this evening in this process and in this presentation. Dr. Moreland, again, thank you.
Happy to be with you.